The metal detector screamed, not the polite chirp it makes when someone forgets coins in their pocket. This was a sustained, violent shriek that made heads turn across Terminal C. Isaac Ike Donovan stood frozen in the scanner's archway, his weathered hands raised slightly, palms open. The sound didn't stop. It wailed like an alarm, like a warning, like something was terribly wrong. "Step back, sir." The TSA agent's voice carried no warmth. "Step back through the detector." Ike complied, moving with the careful slowness of a man who'd learned long ago that sudden movements invited trouble. His thick winter coat hung heavy on his frame, making him look bulkier than he was. Beneath the fluorescent lights, his face showed every one of his 73 years. Deep lines carved paths from his eyes to his jaw. His hands, when he lowered them, trembled slightly. "Empty your pockets. Everything." "Already did," Ike said quietly. His voice had the texture of gravel, worn smooth by decades. "Before I came through, the agent, a younger man with a crew cut and a name tag that read Morrison, gestured impatiently. Then you missed something. Belt, watch, jewelry. Don't wear any of that." Morrison's eyes narrowed. Behind him, two more agents had materialized, drawn by the persistent alarm. A woman with sharp features and a radio clipped to her shoulder. A broad-shouldered man whose hand rested casually near his hip. The morning rush of travelers began to slow, people craning their necks to see what was causing the hold-up. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remove the coat." Ike's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's 40 degrees in here." "Remove the coat, sir, now." There was no room for negotiation in Morrison's tone. Ike's fingers moved to the zipper, pulling it down with deliberate care. The coat came off in stages, revealing a thin flannel shirt beneath, tucked into jeans that had seen better decades. He held the coat out. Morrison snatched it, began patting it down with aggressive thoroughness, checking every pocket, every seam, every fold. Nothing. "Go through again." Ike walked through the detector a second time. The alarm exploded into sound once more, even louder than before, as if the machine itself was outraged. Several passengers in line behind him began muttering, checking their watches, shifting their carry-ons with impatient jerks. Morrison's face darkened. "What are you carrying?" "Nothing. The machine says different. The machine's wrong. The machine's never wrong." Morrison stepped closer, invading Ike's space with practiced intimidation. "You want to tell me what you've got under that shirt? Or do we need to make this difficult?" Ike met his eyes without flinching. "I'm not carrying anything." The female agent moved to Morrison's side, her voice low but audible. Could be a prosthetic, metal pins, medical implant. Then he should have declared it. Morrison turned back to Ike. "You have any metal in your body, sir? Surgical hardware? Pacemaker?" A pause, brief but heavy. "Something like that," Ike said. "Something like that isn't an answer." Morrison's hand moved to his radio. "I'm going to need you to come with us. Secondary screening. I've got a flight." "You should have thought of that before you tried to smuggle contraband through security." "I'm not smuggling anything." "Then you won't mind proving it." Morrison nodded to the other agents. They closed in, forming a loose triangle around Ike. Not touching him, not yet, but the message was clear. He wasn't leaving without them. The walk to the secondary screening area felt longer than it was. Ike moved through the terminal with 3 TSA agents flanking him like an honor guard in reverse. Passengers stared. Some filmed on their phones. A child asked his mother why the old man was in trouble. Ike kept his eyes forward, his expression carved from stone. The screening room was small, windowless, lit by the same harsh fluorescence that seemed to exist in every government building ever constructed. A metal table, plastic chairs, a full-body scanner in the corner, its bulk dominating the cramped space. Morrison gestured to it. In there. That's necessary. You set off the detector twice. Yeah, it's necessary. Morrison crossed his arms. Unless you want to explain right now what you're hiding. Ike looked at the scanner, then back at Morrison. Something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not anger. Something older, something tired. I'm not hiding anything, he said again. Then get in the scanner. Ike walked into the machine's embrace. The cylindrical walls rose around him, close enough to touch. He raised his arms as instructed, assuming the position he'd assumed 1,000 times in 1,000 different contexts. The machine hummed to life, invisible waves passing through his body, translating flesh and bone into digital imagery. Morrison watched the monitor. His expression shifted from suspicion to confusion to something else entirely. The color drained from his face. Jesus Christ, he whispered. The female agent stepped closer, peering at the screen. Her hand rose to her mouth. The third agent, the broad-shouldered one, went rigid. On the monitor, Ike's chest cavity glowed like a constellation. Dozens of bright white fragments scattered throughout the tissue, clustered near the heart, the lungs, the major vessels. Metal, shrapnel, each piece caught by the scanner's eye, each piece rendered in stark, undeniable clarity. They formed a pattern, a map of violence written in steel and survival. Morrison's voice came out strangled. Sir, I need you to step out of the scanner. Ike emerged slowly, lowering his arms. His face remained impassive, but his breathing had changed. Shallower, more controlled. What the hell is that? Morrison asked, though his tone had shifted. The aggression was gone, replaced by something closer to shock. Told you, Ike said quietly. Medical. That's not medical. That's... Morrison stopped, looking back at the screen. How are you alive? Ike didn't answer. The female agent found her voice. Sir, those fragments, where did they come from? Long time ago. How long? Long enough. Morrison stepped forward, his earlier hostility replaced by something more complex. Sir, I need to call this in. We need to document. No, you don't. The voice came from the doorway. A new figure stood there, older than the other agents, with silver hair and a supervisor's badge clipped to his belt. He'd been watching through the observation window. His eyes moved from the monitor to Ike, then back again. Sir, Morrison turned, confused. Protocol says... I know what protocol says. The supervisor entered the room. His gaze locked on the screen. He studied the pattern of fragments, the density, the distribution. His jaw worked silently. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight the others didn't understand. Beirut! Ike's eyes snapped to him. For the first time, something cracked in his composure. How did you... My brother. The supervisor moved closer to the monitor, pointing to a cluster of fragments near Ike's left lung. He came back with something similar. Not as much, but the pattern's the same. He turned to face Ike directly. Barracks bombing. October 83. The room went silent. Ike's throat worked. You know about that. Everyone in my family knows about that. The supervisor's voice softened. My brother was one of the lucky ones. Only caught the edge of the blast. Spent 6 months in Bethesda getting pieces removed. He gestured to the screen. But you were close, weren't you? Ike's hands curled into fists at his sides. Close enough. How many did they get out? Not enough. Too close to the heart. Too close to everything. Ike's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Surgeons said removing them would kill me faster than leaving them in. So they stayed. Morrison stared at the screen, then at Ike, comprehension dawning slowly. You've been carrying that for 42 years. Ike finished. Give or take. The female agent's eyes had gone wide. The Beirut barracks bombing. I read about that in training. 241 service members killed. 241, Ike repeated, the numbers heavy on his tongue. I knew most of them. The supervisor stepped back, his posture changing. Not quite attention, but something close. What unit? Battalion Landing Team 1-8, 2nd Platoon. Marines. Yes, sir. The supervisor's hand rose in an instinctive gesture, almost a salute, before he caught himself. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll get you processed through immediately. Morrison looked between them, still processing. But the fragments are staying exactly where they are, the supervisor said firmly. And we're going to make damn sure this man gets to his gate. He turned to Ike. Where are you headed? Phoenix. Visiting my sister. When's your flight? Ike checked his watch. A simple analog piece with a cracked face. 30 minutes. You'll make it. The supervisor opened the door, gesturing for Ike to follow. Morrison, get his coat. Bring it to gate B7. He looked at the other agents. All of you, back to your stations. I'll handle this personally. They moved through the terminal differently this time. The supervisor walked beside Ike, not behind him, not surrounding him. As they passed through security, the supervisor spoke quietly into his radio. Ike couldn't hear the words, but he saw the effect. Agents straightened as they approached. A path cleared through the crowd. You didn't have to do this, Ike said. Yes, I did. The supervisor glanced at him. My brother never talked much about Beirut, but when he did, he always said the same thing. The ones who didn't make it out deserved better than they got, and the ones who did, they deserved better too. They reached the gate with 15 minutes to spare. The supervisor spoke briefly with the gate agent. A young woman who listened, nodded, and immediately picked up her phone. Ike stood to the side, aware of the stares from other passengers, the whispered conversations. Morrison appeared, slightly out of breath, carrying Ike's coat. He handed it over with something approaching reverence. Sir, I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't... You were doing your job, Ike said, taking the coat. No apology needed. Still, Morrison hesitated. Thank you for your service. Ike nodded, the gesture economical, practiced. Morrison retreated, but the supervisor remained. The gate agent hung up her phone and approached. Mr. Donovan, we're going to board you first. The captain would like to speak with you before takeoff. Well, that's not necessary. It's already arranged. She smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. Please, follow me. The supervisor extended his hand. Ike took it. The handshake lasted longer than standard, carried more weight than a simple farewell. Safe travels, the supervisor said. And thank you for carrying what you've carried. Ike's throat tightened. He managed a nod, not trusting his voice, and followed the gate agent down the jetway. The aircraft's interior smelled of recycled air and industrial carpet. The gate agent led him past the first-class cabin, past the cockpit door, which stood open. Inside, a pilot with silver temples and captain stripes looked up from his pre-flight checklist. Captain Rodriguez, he introduced himself standing. His eyes went to Ike's chest, though there was nothing visible through the flannel shirt. TSA supervisor radioed ahead, told me about your situation. It's not a situation, Ike said quietly. It's just how things are. Rodriguez stepped out of the cockpit, studying Ike with the assessing gaze of someone who'd learned to read people at altitude. Beirut Barracks, 83. Yes, sir. I was Air Force, different theater, but we all heard about Beirut. Rodriguez paused. My co-pilot's father was Army, served in Lebanon during the peacekeeping mission. He said it was supposed to be safe, until it wasn't. Nothing's safe, Ike said. Not really. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Sir, I'd like to offer you a seat in first class. It's not much, but I can't afford. It's complimentary, courtesy of the airline. Rodriguez gestured towards the front of the cabin, and courtesy of everyone on this flight who understands what you've carried. Ike looked past him into the first-class cabin. Leather seats, extra legroom, passengers already settled, reading tablets, sipping pre-departure beverages. I don't need special treatment. It's not special treatment, it's respect. Rodriguez's voice carried quiet insistence. You've been carrying weight most people can't imagine. Let us carry you for a few hours. Something in Ike's chest tightened, and it had nothing to do with the shrapnel. He nodded, unable to form words. Rodriguez led him into the cabin. As they entered, he raised his voice slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Isaac Donovan. Mr. Donovan is a Marine Corps veteran who served in Beirut in 1983. He carries fragments from the barracks bombing in his chest to this day. 42 years of service that never ended. The cabin went still. Then, from the back row, a man in a business suit stood. He began to clap, slowly at first, then with increasing conviction. A woman across the aisle joined him, then another passenger, then another. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin was on its feet, applause filling the confined space. Ike stood frozen in the aisle, his weathered face struggling to maintain composure. His hands trembled at his sides. His eyes, which had remained dry through the interrogation, through the scanner, through the supervisor's recognition, began to shine with moisture. Rodriguez guided him to seat 2A, the window seat in the second row. Your seat, sir. Ike sank into the leather, the applause continuing around him. A flight attendant appeared with a bottle of water, setting it on his tray table with a gentle smile. The passenger beside him, an older woman with kind eyes, reached over and briefly squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered. My father was Navy. He would have been honored to sit beside you. The applause gradually subsided. Passengers returned to their seats. The cabin settled into the familiar pre-flight routine, but the atmosphere had changed. People kept glancing toward Ike's seat, not with curiosity or suspicion, but with something deeper. Recognition, gratitude, connection. Rodriguez returned to the cockpit, but left the door open. His voice came over the intercom moments later. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. We'll be departing shortly for Phoenix. Flight time approximately 4 hours. We're honored to have a true American hero on board today. Mr. Donovan, this flight is dedicated to you and all those who served alongside you. More applause rippled through the cabin, spreading from first class back through the aircraft. Ike pressed his forehead against the window, watching ground crew move around the aircraft, loading bags, guiding the pushback tractor into position. The woman beside him spoke again. How do you do it? Carry that around every day? Ike turned from the window. You just do. Don't have a choice. But doesn't it hurt? Sometimes. When the weather changes. When I move wrong. He touched his chest lightly, fingers resting over his heart. But the weight isn't the metal. It's the names, the faces, the ones who didn't get to carry anything home. The woman's eyes glistened. I can't imagine. Hope you never have to. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, the familiar lurch and mechanical whine of movement. Through the window, Ike saw the terminal receding, saw the supervisor still standing at the gate window, watching. The man raised his hand in a final salute. Ike returned it, palm against the window. The flight attendant returned, leaning down to speak quietly. Mr. Donovan, is there anything we can get you? Anything at all? I'm fine, thank you. The captain asked me to tell you that if you need anything during the flight, just let us know. Medical attention, extra oxygen, anything. I've been fine for 42 years. I'll be fine for 4 more hours. She smiled, but concern lingered in her eyes. The shrapnel. Does it set off metal detectors often? Every time? Usually I warn them ahead. Today I forgot." He paused. "Or maybe I just got tired of explaining." "I understand." She straightened. "Well, you don't have to explain anything here. Just rest." The aircraft taxied toward the runway, joining the queue of departing flights. Ike watched the landscape roll past. The familiar geometry of airports, the same everywhere in the world. Runways and taxiways, fuel trucks and baggage carts, the controlled chaos of movement and logistics. His chest ached, not badly, but enough to notice. The cold always made it worse. The fragments shifted with temperature, with pressure, with the mysterious rhythms of a body that had learned to accommodate foreign objects in intimate spaces. He'd grown so accustomed to the sensation that he barely registered it anymore. It was simply part of being alive. The aircraft reached the runway, engines spooling up to take off power. The acceleration pressed Ike back into his seat, the familiar physics of flight overcoming gravity through sheer force. The nose lifted. The wheels left the ground. Phoenix waited ahead, his sister's house, a week of quiet conversation and shared meals. But for now, suspended between earth and sky, Ike allowed himself to simply exist. Not as a veteran, not as a survivor, not as a man carrying the physical evidence of violence in his chest, just as Isaac Donovan, passenger in seat 2A, watching the world shrink below. The woman beside him had returned to her book, but she glanced over periodically, as if checking to make sure he was still there, still breathing, still present. Other passengers did the same. The flight attendants found excuses to pass by his row, offering drinks, snacks, magazines. Their attention was gentle, unobtrusive, but constant. An hour into the flight, a man from economy class appeared in the first-class aisle. He was younger, maybe 40, with the bearing of someone who'd served. He approached Ike's row hesitantly. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm in 23C. The flight attendant told me about what you're carrying." He paused, gathering words. "I'm Army. Did 2 tours in Iraq. I just wanted to say, what you went through, what you survived, it matters. You matter." Ike looked up at him. "You served. That matters too." "Not the same. Service is service. Doesn't matter when or where." The man's eyes reddened. He nodded, unable to speak, and retreated back toward economy. But he wasn't the last. Over the next hour, 3 more passengers made the journey forward. A woman whose brother had been killed in Afghanistan, a man whose father had served in Vietnam, a teenager whose grandfather had stormed Normandy. Each came with their own story, their own connection to the invisible thread that linked those who'd served and those who'd lost and those who remembered. Ike received them all with the same quiet dignity, the same economical words, the same understanding that sometimes people needed to speak, needed to connect, needed to acknowledge the weight that others carried. The flight attendant eventually intervened gently, explaining that Mr. Donovan needed to rest, that perhaps others could express their gratitude in writing, that the captain had asked that he not be overwhelmed. The procession stopped, but the atmosphere remained charged with unspoken emotion. Ike closed his eyes, not sleeping, just existing in the darkness behind his eyelids. The engines hummed their constant song. The cabin air circulated with mechanical precision. His chest rose and fell, each breath navigating around the constellation of metal that had become part of his anatomy. He thought about Beirut. Not often, not anymore, but today had cracked something open. The barracks had been a 4-story building, concrete and steel, housing hundreds of Marines. The truck had come at dawn, a Mercedes truck loaded with explosives, driven by someone willing to die to kill. The explosion had been catastrophic. The building had collapsed in seconds, pancaking down, crushing everyone inside. Ike had been on the 2nd floor. He remembered the sound first, a roar that erased all other noise, all thought, all sensation, except the awareness of being unmade. Then the pressure wave, the heat, the sensation of flying and falling simultaneously. Then darkness. He'd woken in a field hospital, his chest wrapped in bandages, tubes running from his body, machines beeping their insistent rhythms. A surgeon had explained in careful terms that he was alive by millimeters, that the shrapnel had missed every vital structure by distances measured in tissue paper thickness, that removing the fragments would require opening his chest and potentially causing more damage than leaving them in place. So they'd stayed 42 years of carrying the physical evidence of that October morning. 42 years of setting off metal detectors, of explaining to doctors, of feeling the fragments shift when he breathed too deep or moved too fast. 42 years of being a living memorial to 241 men who'd never had the chance to carry anything home. "Mr. Donovan," the flight attendant's voice pulled him back. "We're beginning our descent into Phoenix. Can I get you anything before we land?" He opened his eyes. "No, thank you." The captain asked if you'd like to remain seated while other passengers deplane. Give you time to gather yourself without the rush. That's kind, but not necessary. He insisted. She smiled, said it's the least we can do. The descent was smooth, the Arizona landscape rising to meet them, red rock and desert sprawl, the geometric precision of suburban development spreading across the valley. The wheels touched down with barely a bump, the engines reversing thrust, the aircraft slowing with controlled deceleration. As they taxied to the gate, Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we arrive in Phoenix, I'd like to ask everyone to remain seated for just a moment after we reach the gate. We have a special passenger on board who deserves a proper farewell." The aircraft stopped. The seatbelt sign chimed off, but nobody moved. Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit, followed by his co-pilot. They walked to Ike's row and stood at attention. Then, simultaneously, they saluted. Ike rose slowly from his seat, his body protesting the hours of sitting. He returned the salute with the precision of muscle memory, his hand moving to his brow with the exactness of decades-old training. The entire cabin erupted in applause again. Passengers stood, filling the aisle, clapping with sustained intensity. The flight attendants joined in, their professional composure cracking to reveal genuine emotion. The applause continued as Ike gathered his coat, as he moved into the aisle, as he walked toward the exit. Rodriguez accompanied him to the door. "Sir, there's a wheelchair available if you need." "I can walk." "I know you can, but the offer stands. I've been walking for 42 years. I'll keep walking." Rodriguez nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then walk proud, sir. You've earned it." Ike stepped off the aircraft into the jetway, the applause following him until the door closed. The jetway was empty, quiet after the intensity of the cabin. His footsteps echoed on the metal floor. His chest ached with each breath, the fragments shifting, reminding him of their presence. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, the weight felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but shared, acknowledged, honored. He emerged into the terminal, where his sister waited by the gate, her face lighting up when she saw him. She rushed forward, embracing him carefully, mindful of his chest, of the fragility that lived beneath his weathered exterior. "How was the flight?" she asked. Ike looked back at the gate, at the aircraft visible through the windows, at the passengers beginning to deplane behind him. "Different," he said finally. It was different. She studied his face, seeing something there she hadn't seen in years. Good different? He thought about the scanner image, about the supervisor's recognition, about Rodriguez's salute, about the applause that had filled the cabin twice. He thought about the passengers who'd come forward to share their stories, to connect their losses to his survival. He thought about being carried for once instead of carrying. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Good different." They walked through the terminal together, past the shops and restaurants, past the other travelers rushing to their gates or dragging their luggage toward ground transportation. Nobody stared at Ike now. Nobody knew what he carried beneath his flannel shirt. He was just another old man, moving slowly through an airport, heading home. But he knew, and for the first time in 42 years, that knowledge didn't feel quite so heavy. If you believe every life holds a story worth remembering, subscribe to this channel and join our community. The fragments in his chest would never leave. The names of the 241 would never fade. The memory of that October morning would never fully release its grip. But somewhere between Terminal C and Gate B7, between the scanner's revelation and the cabin's applause, something had shifted. Not healing. Healing was too simple a word for what lived in his chest. But recognition, connection, the understanding that carrying weight alone was one kind of burden, but carrying it witnessed, acknowledged, honored, was something else entirely. Ike Donovan walked out of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport into the desert sun, his sister at his side, 42 years of shrapnel still lodged near his heart. But for the first time in longer than he could measure, he felt something other than the weight. He felt seen, and that, he thought, was worth more than all the metal in his chest. The drive to his sister's house took 40 minutes through Phoenix traffic. Margaret drove carefully, glancing at him every few minutes as if checking to make sure he was still there, still solid, still breathing. She'd always done that, even when they were children. The protective older sister, though she was only 2 years his senior. "You're quiet," she said as they merged onto the freeway. "Tired. It's more than tired." She knew him too well. Something happened at the airport. Ike watched the desert landscape roll past, the saguaro cacti standing like sentinels in the rust-colored earth. "Security stopped me. The metal detector." Margaret's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Again? I forgot to warn them this time. Isaac?" Her voice carried the exasperation of decades. "You know better." "I know." He touched his chest absently. "They made me go through the body scanner. Saw everything." She was quiet for a moment, navigating around a slow-moving truck. And one of the supervisors recognized the pattern. His brother was in Beirut, survived the blast. Margaret's breath caught. "Oh, they upgraded me to first class. The pilot dedicated the flight to me. Everyone applauded." The words came out flat, factual, but underneath them ran a current of emotion he couldn't quite name. "That's wonderful, Ike." "Is it?" He turned to look at her. 241 men died. I lived, and I get applause. You get recognition. There's a difference. Doesn't feel different. Margaret took the exit toward her neighborhood, the traffic thinning as they moved into residential streets. "You've been carrying survivor's guilt for 42 years. Maybe it's time to put some of that down." Can't put down what's embedded in your chest. I'm not talking about the shrapnel. They pulled into her driveway, a modest ranch house with a well-tended garden and a porch swing that creaked in the desert wind. Margaret turned off the engine, but didn't immediately get out. She sat with her hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. "When you first came back from Beirut," she said quietly, "you were so angry. At the doctors for not taking the fragments out, at the Corps for sending you there, at God for letting it happen, at yourself for surviving. I remember." But somewhere along the way, the anger turned into something else. You started carrying it like a penance, like if you suffered enough, it would somehow balance the scales for the men who died. Ike didn't respond. But that's not how it works, little brother. Their deaths aren't your fault. Your survival isn't your fault. And accepting recognition for what you've endured doesn't diminish their sacrifice. You don't understand. I understand that you've been punishing yourself for 4 decades. And I understand that today, for maybe the first time, someone saw past the punishment to the person underneath. She turned to face him, her eyes fierce with sisterly love. Let yourself be seen, Isaac. Let yourself be honored. You've earned it. He met her gaze, saw the tears threatening to spill, saw the decades of watching him suffer reflected in her expression. I don't know how. Then learn. Starting now. Starting here. She reached over and squeezed his hand. You're home. You're safe. And you're allowed to rest. They went inside, Margaret fussing over him in the way she always did, showing him to the guest room, asking if he needed anything, promising to make his favorite dinner. Ike set his small duffel bag on the bed and sat beside it, the mattress soft after the aircraft seat, after the hard chairs in the security room, after the years of sleeping on surfaces that never quite accommodated the fragments in his chest. He lay back, staring at the ceiling, and allowed himself to simply breathe, in and out. The fragments shifted with each breath, a familiar discomfort, a constant reminder. But Margaret's words echoed in his mind. Let yourself be seen. He'd spent so long hiding, deflecting, minimizing, telling people he was fine when he wasn't, refusing help when he needed it, carrying everything alone because he believed that was what he deserved, what he owed to the men who'd never had the chance to carry anything. But today had been different. Today, people had seen, and instead of pity, they'd offered respect. Instead of treating him as broken, they'd honored him as whole. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe it was time to learn how to accept that. He must have dozed, because when he opened his eyes again, the light through the window had shifted, gone golden with late afternoon. Voices drifted from the kitchen, Margaret's and someone else's, male, unfamiliar. Ike rose slowly, his body protesting the movement, and made his way down the hallway. In the kitchen, Margaret stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled of garlic and herbs. Beside her, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face turned as Ike entered. Isaac, this is Tom Brennan. He lives next door. Tom, my brother Isaac. Tom extended his hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. Pleasure to meet you. Margaret's told me a lot about you. Don't believe everything she says. Ike shook his hand, noting the way Tom stood, the set of his shoulders, the economy of his movements. You served. Tom's eyebrows rose. How'd you know? Can always tell. A slow smile spread across Tom's face. Army. 2 tours in Vietnam. You? Marines, Lebanon. Tom's expression shifted, recognition dawning. Beirut? Ike nodded. Jesus. Tom pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, gesturing for Ike to sit. I heard about that. Wasn't there, but I knew guys who were. Peacekeeping mission that turned into a nightmare. That's one way to describe it. Margaret brought over 2 glasses of iced tea, setting them on the table. Tom runs a veterans support group at the community center. Meets every Thursday evening. I'm not much for groups, Ike said. Neither was I, Tom replied. Took me 20 years to walk through that door. But once I did. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It helps. Talking to people who understand, who've carried similar weight. I've managed fine on my own. Have you? Tom's question was gentle, not challenging. Or have you just gotten good at pretending? Ike took a sip of tea, buying time. The cold liquid felt good against his throat. What's the difference? The difference is that managing alone means you're still carrying everything. Talking to others means you get to set some of it down, even if just for an hour. Tom leaned back in his chair. We don't do therapy. We don't do pity. We just sit and talk, share stories. Remember the ones who didn't make it home. Honor the ones who did. I know, nobody needs it until they do. Tom stood finishing his tea. Group meets at 7 on Thursdays. Community Centre, 3 blocks west. You're welcome anytime. No pressure, no judgment. Just other guys who get it. He said his goodbyes to Margaret and left through the back door. Ike watched him go, saw the slight limp in his left leg, the way he favoured his right side. Everyone who'd served carried something. Some wounds were visible, others lived deeper. He's a good man, Margaret said, returning to the stove. Lost his best friend in Da Nang. Took him decades to talk about it. Now he helps others do the same. I'm only here for a week. Thursdays in 3 days. Margaret, I'm not pushing. I'm just saying the option's there. She stirred the pot, not looking at him. You spent 42 years carrying everything alone. Maybe it's time to try something different. Dinner was pot roast with vegetables. Comfort food that tasted like childhood, like safety, like home. They ate on the back patio as the sun set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple and deep crimson. Margaret talked about her garden, her book club, the neighbours, filling the silence with gentle conversation that demanded nothing from him. After dinner, they sat in the porch swing, the metal chains creaking rhythmically as they rocked. The desert night was cool, the air dry, so different from the humidity of the East Coast, where Ike had lived for the past 2 decades. Do you remember, Margaret said softly, when we were kids, and Dad would take us camping in the mountains? I remember. You were always the brave one, climbing the highest trees, swimming in the deepest parts of the lake, never afraid of anything. I was afraid. I just didn't show it. And now, Ike was quiet for a long moment. Now I'm afraid all the time. Afraid the fragments will shift. Afraid my heart will stop. Afraid I'll die alone, and no one will know why, won't understand what I'm carrying. You're not alone, Isaac. You have me. You has people who care. For how long? You're 75. I'm 73. We're not kids anymore. No, but we're here now, and that's what matters. They rocked in silence, the swing's rhythm soothing, hypnotic. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its voice lonely and wild. Ike closed his eyes, feeling the fragments in his chest, feeling the weight of decades, feeling the exhaustion of carrying everything for so long. The people on the plane today, he said finally. They looked at me like I was a hero. You are. I'm not. I'm just someone who didn't die when I should have. That's not true. It is true. 241 men died that day. Why did I live? What makes me special? What makes me worthy of applause and first-class seats and salutes when they got body bags and folded flags? Margaret stopped the swing, turning to face him. You want to know why you lived? I can't answer that. Nobody can. But I can tell you this. You lived because you were supposed to. Because there's something you're meant to do. Some purpose you're meant to serve. Maybe it's helping other veterans. Maybe it's being here with me. Maybe it's just existing as a testament to survival, to resilience, to the human capacity to endure. That's not enough. It's more than enough. You're more than enough. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Stop measuring your worth against the dead. They wouldn't want that. They'd want you to live, really live, not just survive. Ike's throat tightened. I don't know how to do that. Then let me teach you. Let Tom teach you. Let the people who see you, really see you, teach you. She squeezed his hand. You've been a Marine for 42 years. Maybe it's time to just be Isaac. If this story touched your heart, click like and subscribe to honor those who served. The The next 2 days passed quietly. Margaret took him to her favorite spots around Phoenix, a botanical garden filled with desert plants, a small museum dedicated to Native American art, a coffee shop where she knew all the baristas by name. Ike moved through these spaces like a ghost, present but not quite there, his mind circling back to the airport, to the scanner image, to the applause that had filled the aircraft cabin. On Wednesday evening, Margaret mentioned the veterans group again. Tom asked if you'd be coming tomorrow. I haven't decided. What's holding you back? Ike stared at his coffee, watching the cream swirl in dark patterns. What if I go and I can't talk? What if I just sit there like a stone? Then you sit there like a stone. Nobody's going to force you to speak. What if I start talking and can't stop? What if everything I've been holding in for 42 years just comes pouring out? Then it comes pouring out, and people will listen because they understand. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, it's terrifying. But sometimes the terrifying things are the ones we need most. Thursday arrived with a sunrise that set the desert ablaze with color. Ike woke early, his chest aching more than usual, the fragments protesting the dry air, or the altitude, or simply the passage of time. He took his medications, blood thinners to prevent clots around the fragments, pain relievers for the chronic discomfort, beta blockers to ease the strain on his heart, and stood at the window, watching the day begin. Margaret made breakfast, pancakes and bacon, and didn't mention the group meeting, but it hung between them, unspoken, a decision waiting to be made. At 6:30 that evening, Ike put on a clean shirt and his jacket. Margaret looked up from her book, hope flickering in her eyes. "I'm just going for a walk," he said. "The community center is 3 blocks west." "I know. Tom said the group meets in the basement, room B12. I'm just going for a walk, Margaret." "Okay." She returned to her book, but he saw the small smile she tried to hide. Ike stepped out into the cooling evening air. The sun was setting, the sky turning that particular shade of purple that only seemed to exist in the desert. He walked slowly, his body protesting each step, the fragments shifting with his gait. 3 blocks west, he could turn around at any point. He could walk past the community center and keep going. He didn't owe anyone anything, but he kept walking. The community center was a low, sprawling building with a parking lot half full of cars. Ike stood outside for a long moment, his hand on the door handle, his heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the shrapnel near his aorta. "Let yourself be seen." He pulled the door open and stepped inside. The hallway was institutional. Linoleum floors, fluorescent lights, bulletin boards covered with announcements for yoga classes and book clubs and bingo nights. He followed the signs to the basement, down a flight of stairs that made his chest ache, along another corridor to a door marked B12. Voices came from inside, male voices, laughing, talking, the easy camaraderie of people who'd known each other for years. Ike's hand rose to knock, then hesitated. The door opened from the inside. Tom stood there, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Isaac, you came just to observe." That's how everyone starts. Tom stepped aside, gesturing him in. "Come on, we're just getting started." The room was simple, folding chairs arranged in a circle, a coffee maker on a table in the corner, a flag in the corner. 8 men sat in the chairs, ranging in age from their 50s to their 80s. They looked up as Ike entered, their expressions open, curious, welcoming. "Gentlemen," Tom said, "this is Isaac Donovan. He's visiting from the East Coast, Marines, Beirut, 83. The room went quiet. Then an older man with white hair and a cane leaning against his chair spoke. "Barracks bombing." Ike nodded. "Jesus Christ." The man gestured to an empty chair. "Sit down, son. You've earned it." Ike sat, his body tense, his hands gripping his knees. The other men introduced themselves. Names and branches and conflicts. Vietnam mostly, but also Korea, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Different wars, different decades, but the same understanding in their eyes. Tom took a seat, completing the circle. "We usually start by checking in. How's everyone doing this week? Anyone want to share?" A man in his 60s with a prosthetic leg spoke first. "Had a rough Tuesday. Anniversary of the day I lost this." He tapped his artificial limb. "Always hits me harder than I expect." Murmurs of understanding circled the room. Another man shared about a nightmare that had woken him 3 nights in a row. Another talked about a visit from his grandson, how the kid had asked about his medals, how he'd struggled to explain what they meant. The conversation flowed naturally. No one dominating, no one judging. Just men talking, sharing, acknowledging the weight they all carried. Then Tom turned to Ike. "Isaac, you don't have to share if you're not ready. But if you want to, we're listening." Ike opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't know what to say. Start anywhere," the white-haired man said gently. "There's no wrong place to begin." Ike's hand moved to his chest, pressing against the fragments beneath his shirt. "I carry shrapnel from the barracks bombing, too close to my heart to remove. Been there for 42 years. "That's a long time to carry metal," someone said. "It's not the metal that's heavy." The words came out before Ike could stop them. "It's the names. 241 men died that day. I knew most of them, served with them, ate with them, laughed with them, and then they were gone. Just gone." The room was absolutely silent. I was on the 2nd floor when the truck hit. I remember the explosion. I remember flying. I remember waking up in the hospital with tubes everywhere and a surgeon telling me I was lucky. Ike's voice cracked. "Lucky. That's what he called it. Lucky. Survivor's guilt," Tom said quietly. "We all know that weight. But how do you put it down?" Ike looked around the circle, his eyes desperate. "How do you stop feeling like you stole something? Like you're living a life that should have belonged to someone else?" The white-haired man leaned forward. "You don't put it down. Not completely, but you learn to carry it differently. You honor the dead by living well, by being present, by accepting that survival isn't theft. It's responsibility. Responsibility to what? To remember, to witness, to make sure their sacrifice meant something." The man's eyes were fierce. "You're a walking memorial, son. Every breath you take is a testament to what happened that day. That's not theft. That's sacred duty." Ike's vision blurred with tears. "I'm so tired of carrying it alone." "Then don't." Tom's voice was firm. "That's why we're here, to carry it together, to share the weight. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Something broke open in Ike's chest, and it had nothing to do with the shrapnel. 42 years of holding everything in, of refusing help, of believing he deserved to suffer. 42 years of isolation and penance, and self-imposed exile from the world of the living. And in this basement room, surrounded by men who understood, who'd carried their own weight, who'd survived their own hells, he finally allowed himself to let go. He wept, not quietly, not with dignity, but with the raw, ugly honesty of someone who'd been holding back tears for decades. His body shook with sobs. His hands covered his face. The fragments in his chest ached with each gasping breath. No one tried to stop him. No one told him to pull himself together. They just sat with him, bearing witness, holding space for his grief. When the storm finally passed, Ike looked up to find tissues being passed to him, a cup of water appearing in his hand, understanding in every face around the circle. "Thank you," he managed. "Nothing to thank us for," the white-haired man said. "We've all been where you are. Some of us are still there, but it's easier when you're not alone." The meeting continued, the conversation flowing around Ike like a gentle current. He didn't speak again, but he listened. He heard stories of loss and survival, of nightmares and healing, of the long, difficult journey from war to peace. He heard his own experience reflected in different words, different contexts, different wars, but the same essential truth. They had all carried weight. They had all survived when others didn't. They had all struggled with the question of why, and they had all learned, slowly, painfully, that survival was not something to apologize for. It was something to honor. When the meeting ended, the men stood, stretching, moving toward the coffee maker for final cups before heading home. Tom approached Ike, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did good tonight." I fell apart. "That's what I mean. Takes courage to let people see you break. Takes even more courage to let them help you put the pieces back together. I don't know if I can come back. I'm only here until Monday. Then come back next time you visit. Or find a group near where you live. They're everywhere, full of guys like us, carrying weight, learning to set it down." Tom squeezed his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone anymore, Isaac. You never did." Ike walked back to Margaret's house in the dark. The desert night cool against his skin. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by city lights. A vast expanse of light and darkness and infinite space. He felt small beneath them, but for the first time in 42 years, he didn't feel alone. Margaret was waiting on the porch swing when he arrived. She didn't ask how it went. She just moved over, making room for him to sit beside her. They rocked in silence, the chains creaking, the night settling around them. "I cried," Ike said finally. "Good. In front of strangers. Even better. I told them about the shrapnel, about the guilt, about carrying it alone. And they understood. They didn't try to fix me. They just understood." Margaret took his hand. "That's what you've needed all along. Not fixing, just understanding. I'm 73 years old. Took me long enough to figure that out. Better late than never." They sat together as the night deepened, as the temperature dropped, as the desert settled into its nocturnal rhythms. Ike felt the fragments in his chest, felt their familiar weight, their constant presence. But something had shifted. The weight was still there, would always be there, but it felt different now, shared, witnessed, honored. The next morning, Ike woke to find Margaret already up, making coffee in the kitchen. He joined her, accepting a mug with gratitude, sipping the hot liquid slowly. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous activity. I want to find a group. Back home, something like Tom's." Margaret's face lit up. "Really? I can't promise I'll go every week. Can't promise I won't run away the first time. But I want to try. That's all anyone can ask. And I want to talk to someone. A therapist, someone who specializes in veterans. Isaac, I know. I've resisted for decades. But maybe it's time. Maybe I need to stop carrying this alone." Margaret set down her coffee and pulled him into a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you. I haven't done anything yet. You've decided to try. That's everything." The rest of his visit passed in a gentle rhythm. Margaret took him to more of her favorite places. Tom stopped by for dinner one evening, bringing his wife, and they shared stories and laughter and the easy companionship of people who understood each other. Ike went for walks in the desert, feeling the dry air in his lungs, the sun on his face, the earth solid beneath his feet. On his last evening, he and Margaret sat on the porch swing again, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "I don't want to leave," Ike admitted. "Then don't. Stay longer. Stay permanently. There's room here. I have a life back east. Do you? Or do you have an existence?" Ike considered this. His apartment was small, functional, empty. He had no close friends, no community, no connection to anything beyond his daily routines and his monthly visits to the VA hospital. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I ask." The flight home the next day was uneventful. Ike warned security ahead of time about the shrapnel, was escorted through a separate screening process, made it to his gate with time to spare. No drama, no recognition, just another traveler heading home. But as the aircraft lifted off, as Phoenix shrank below, Ike felt something different. Not happiness exactly, not peace, but something closer to hope. The fragments in his chest still ached. The names of the 241 still weighed on his soul. The survivor's guilt still whispered its poison in quiet moments. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had Margaret. He had Tom and the men in the veterans group. He had the memory of the supervisor's recognition, the pilot's salute, the passenger's applause. He had proof that he could be seen, could be honored, could be valued not despite what he carried, but because of it. 2 weeks after returning home, Ike found a veteran support group that met at a community center 15 minutes from his apartment. He attended his first meeting on a Thursday evening, his hands shaking as he walked through the door. The room was different from Tom's group. Bigger, more people, younger veterans mixed with older ones. But the atmosphere was the same. Understanding, acceptance, shared weight. He didn't speak that first night, or the second, but on the third meeting, when the facilitator asked if anyone wanted to share, Ike raised his hand. "My name is Isaac Donovan," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. "I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served in Beirut in 1983. I carry shrapnel from the barracks bombing in my chest, and I've been carrying it alone for 42 years. He paused, looking around the circle, seeing recognition in every face. "But I don't want to carry it alone anymore." The room erupted in quiet affirmations, nods, murmurs of understanding. A few people clapped. Ike felt tears threatening but held them back, not from shame, but from the overwhelming realization that he'd finally found his way home, not to a place, but to a community, to understanding, to the simple, profound truth that no one had to carry their weight alone. Over the following months, Ike became a regular at the group. He shared his story in pieces, each meeting revealing a little more, each revelation lightening the load incrementally. He listened to others' stories, finding echoes of his own experience in their words. He learned that healing wasn't linear, wasn't simple, wasn't about forgetting or moving on. It was about integration, about making peace with what couldn't be changed, about honoring the past while living in the present. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in PTSD and survivor's guilt. The sessions were difficult, often painful, forcing him to confront truths he'd spent decades avoiding. But slowly, incrementally, he began to understand that survival wasn't theft, it was gift. And the best way to honor the dead was to live fully, to connect deeply, to refuse to waste the life he'd been given. 6 months after his visit to Phoenix, Ike received a call from Margaret. "I found a house," she said without preamble. 2 bedrooms, walking distance from my place. It's perfect for you." "Margaret, don't argue. Just come look at it. Spend a month here. See how it feels. If you hate it, you can go back, but you'd at least give it a chance." Ike looked around his small apartment, at the bare walls and minimal furniture, at the life he'd built that wasn't really a life at all. He thought about the veterans group in Phoenix, about Tom and the white-haired man and the others who'd welcomed him without question. He thought about Margaret's porch swing and the desert sunsets and the feeling of being home. "Okay," he said, "I'll come look." 3 months later, Ike Donovan moved to Phoenix permanently. He sold his apartment, packed his few belongings and drove across the country with Margaret's voice on speakerphone, guiding him through the long miles. He moved into the small house she'd found, unpacked his boxes, hung pictures on the walls for the first time in decades. He joined Tom's veterans group permanently. He volunteered at the VA hospital, talking to younger veterans, sharing his story, offering the understanding he'd once desperately needed. He took walks in the desert every morning, feeling the sun warm the fragments in his chest, feeling alive in a way he hadn't felt since before Beirut. He didn't forget the 241. He never would. But he learned to carry their memory differently, not as penance, but as honor, not as guilt, but as responsibility. He lived for them, yes, but also for himself, for the life he'd been given, for the gift of survival. On the anniversary of the bombing, Ike attended a memorial service at the local Marine Corps League. He stood with other veterans, saluting the flag, listening to the names being read. 241 names, each one a person, each one a loss, each one a reminder of what had been taken. But when the ceremony ended, when the other veterans approached him, shaking his hand, thanking him for his service, for his survival, for his witness, Ike felt something he'd never felt before on this day. Gratitude, not for the bombing, not for the loss, but for the life he'd built in its aftermath, for the connections he'd made, for the weight he'd learned to share, for the understanding that he didn't have to carry everything alone. That evening, he sat on his own porch, watching the sunset, feeling the fragments shift in his chest with each breath. They would never leave. The scars would never fully heal. The memories would never completely fade. But he was no longer defined by what he carried. He was defined by how he carried it. With dignity, with connection, with the understanding that survival was not something to apologize for, but something to honor. Isaac Donovan, 74 years old, Marine Corps veteran, survivor of the Beirut barracks bombing, carrier of 42 years of shrapnel and memory and loss, sat in the desert twilight and allowed himself to feel something he'd denied himself for decades. Peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that his life mattered, that his survival meant something, that the weight he carried, shared with others, witnessed and honored, was not a burden, but a testament to resilience, to connection, to the unbreakable human capacity to endure. And as the stars emerged overhead, as the desert night settled around him, as the fragments in his chest ached with their familiar presence, Ike Donovan smiled. He was home. If you believe every life holds a story worth remembering, subscribe to this channel and join our community.